In the boundless reaches of the prehistoric grasslands, there once moved creatures so immense and powerful that their very silhouettes etched awe into the horizon. Mammoths with sweeping tusks that could uproot trees, towering bison that thundered across the plains like living storms, and saber-toothed cats whose fangs gleamed like ivory scythes in the fading light. Yet as quickly as they had ruled, these giants vanished, leaving only bones scattered in dry soil and faded memories pressed into stone. And the question that has haunted scientists, storytellers, and wanderers alike is deceptively simple. What killed the giants of the grasslands? Was it the slow and steady march of climate shifting beneath their hooves? Was it the sudden and merciless arrival of humankind, whose sharp minds and sharper weapons cut through herds? Or was it something more insidious, disease and ecological collapse working hand in hand to dismantle an ancient balance? In this journey we will step into that vanished world, piecing together the riddle of extinction through fossilized clues, frozen DNA, and the echoes of vanished ecosystems. And as we search for the answer, we will discover not just the fate of the grassland titans, but perhaps the warnings they left for us today. The story of the giants of the grasslands begins not with their death, but with their rise. For millions of years before their disappearance, the open plains of Earth were alive with creatures whose scale and strength defied imagination. These were the Megafauna, the great animals of the Pleistocene epoch, whose lives were bound to the rhythm of seasons, ice and grass, and among them strode the woolly mammoth, clad in thick hair, its massive tusks sweeping in arcs that could measure more than 15 feet, a creature built for the cold, for tearing through snow to reach the grasses beneath, and in its shadow moved the giant bison, larger and heavier than any living cow, a muscular storm that fed predators as well as soil. For its migrations turned the grasslands fertile with dung and trampled earth, and sharing these wide spaces were the giant ground sloths, towering like moving walls of muscle and fur. Slow in gait, but powerful enough to knock down small trees with their massive claws, they were browsers of shrubs and leaves, shaping the vegetation in ways unseen today, while above them prowled the saber-toothed cats, predators whose long, curved fangs were perfect for piercing the throats of large prey, their muscular frames blending patience and explosive power. And scattered among them were glyptodons, armored like living tanks, carapaces patterned like giant tortoise shells, but with the bulk of small cars, slow but almost unassailable, and near rivers and wetlands. The grassland gave way to water where the beavers were giants too, some as large as black bears, their teeth carving the landscape into wetlands and dams that reshaped habitats, creating niches for others. All of this existed in an interconnected web, a vast stage of survival where each player had a role to keep the grasslands alive. For the grasslands themselves were a product of ice and fire, shaped by glaciers that scraped the earth and retreated, leaving behind fertile plains that grew endless seas of grass. Grasses that fed herds of grazers, grazers that fed predators, and predators that controlled balance. And in this world the giants were not anomalies, they were necessities, keystones that held together an ecosystem unlike any other. Their sheer size deterred smaller predators, their migrations stirred the soil, and their deaths provided food for scavengers that ranged from vultures to dire wolves. And if one stood in those grasslands 20,000 years ago, the earth itself would have trembled with life. Thunderous hooves, the distant calls of mammoths, the deep shadows of cats stalking in the grass. Yet the seeds of fragility were already sown. For even as these animals thrived, the climate was restless. The Ice Age brought cycles of glaciation, immense sheets of ice creeping forward and then receding, reshaping the boundaries of grasslands and forests, demanding adaptability from every creature that walked. And while the giants had adapted for ages, their massive bodies made them specialists, built to handle cold, built to move across open plains, built to consume enormous amounts of vegetation. And such specialization often meant vulnerability when conditions shifted. But still they endured, as they had for hundreds of thousands of years, weathering shifts that would have broken lesser creatures, their dominance unquestioned, until something new appeared on the stage. Something small, upright, and armed not with tusks or claws, but with tools, strategy, and fire. The arrival of humans into these grasslands was not marked by thunderous hooves or the roar of predators, but by quiet persistence, by footprints pressed into mud, by spear points buried in the ribs of fallen mammoths, by campfires flickering at the edges of the plains. And for the first time in their long history, the giants of the grasslands faced a competitor unlike any they had known. A creature capable of hunting, not with brute strength but with cooperation, capable of persistence, hunts that outlasted even the most enduring grazers, and capable of reshaping entire landscapes with deliberate fire. And while this encounter did not spell instant doom, it introduced a pressure that would grow. A pressure that, when combined with the instability of climate and the ever-present risks of disease, would set the stage for one of the greatest mysteries of extinction ever written. Yet before we confront their decline, we must linger in their world to understand how such creatures lived. For to know why the giants died, we must first grasp why they flourished, and the answer lies in the grass itself. For grasslands were engines of abundance, stretching as far as eyes could see, storing sunlight in their blades and offering it to those who grazed. And the grazers multiplied, feeding the predators. And in this endless cycle of life, the giants became not only rulers, but also engineers of the plains. Mammoths breaking ice to reach waterholes that others would use, bison carving migratory paths that turned into natural corridors, sloths keeping forests at bay and ensuring the spread of grass, and beavers reshaping water systems. They were not just inhabitants, they were architects of an entire biome. And their story is not simply about creatures that lived and died, but about the building blocks of the world we inherited, a world where their absence is still felt in the shape of soils, in the patterns of plant growth, in the ecological gaps that remain empty. And as we stand in the present, gazing back at that vanished landscape, the question grows sharper. For how could such abundance collapse? How could rulers so powerful fall so swiftly? And in asking these questions, we turn toward the dark mystery that Part 2 will unfold. The story of how climate change, humans, and unseen forces converge to unravel the giants of the grasslands. When the last ice age began to loosen its grip around 12,000 years ago, the world of the grassland giants entered a period of instability that tested every adaptation they had relied upon for millennia. For as the great ice sheets melted, they released torrents of water that reshaped rivers, lakes, and coastlines, while the warming climate transformed wide plains of grass into forests and wetlands, shrinking the open spaces that mammoths, bison, and other megafauna depended on. And with every shift in temperature, the plants they fed upon changed too. Grasses receded, shrubs and trees advanced, and the delicate balance of diet and habitat began to falter. Yet even as climate delivered its blows, a new and equally relentless force was at work: humanity, whose spread across continents coincided eerily with the disappearance of the giants. And the evidence lies not only in the timing, but in the bones themselves. Mammoth skeletons scarred by stone-tipped spears, mass kill sites where entire herds were driven into bogs or over cliffs, and the traces of butchered carcasses found alongside human tools, suggesting that humans hunted not just opportunistically but strategically. And this theory, known as the overkill hypothesis, paints a picture of skilled hunters pushing already stressed populations past the tipping point. For while mammoths could resist wolves or saber-toothed cats, they had no defense against groups of humans armed with coordinated tactics, fire to drive herds, and weapons to strike from a distance. And though a single kill might seem insignificant, when repeated across regions and over generations, the impact became devastating, especially since large animals reproduce slowly. Each mammoth cow bearing only a few calves in a lifetime, each giant sloth investing years to raise its young. And when hunting outpaced reproduction, collapse became inevitable. Yet not all scholars placed the blame so squarely on humans, for climate was ruthless in its own right, altering rainfall patterns, reducing forage, and exposing animals to new stresses. And some argue that it was this environmental upheaval that truly crippled populations, making them fragile enough that even moderate human hunting became catastrophic, while others point to the possibility of disease carried by newly spreading species, or even indirectly by humans and their dogs, pathogens that might have leapt across species, silently thinning herds until the ecosystems buckled. And to this day, scientists debate which factor held the sharpest blade, climate, humans, or disease. But increasingly the evidence suggests it was not one dagger, but many that struck at once, a synergy of doom, where shrinking habitats, changing vegetation, hunting pressure, and potential epidemics combined into a storm the giants could not withstand. And what makes this mystery so gripping is how quickly it happened. For in the geological blink of a few thousand years, species that had thrived for hundreds of thousands were gone, mammoths disappearing from North America, giant ground sloths vanishing from the grasslands of South America, and saber-toothed cats fading into legend, leaving behind only scattered fossils and the occasional frozen carcass preserved in Siberian ice, their fur and flesh hauntingly intact, as if they had just lain down to sleep. And while the debates continue, the timing aligns with uncanny precision. In North America, most of the megafauna vanished around the time humans arrived. In Australia, the giants fell not long after human settlement, and in Eurasia, the pattern repeated. The coincidence so strong that even skeptics admit that human influence was likely one of the final straws. And yet, even as we sift through bones and data, we must recognize that extinction is rarely simple. It is rarely the work of a single hand, but rather the unraveling of many threads at once. And in the case of the grassland titans, those threads were pulled faster and harder than ever before, creating a cascade that could not be stopped. And perhaps the most haunting part is not merely that they died, but that the world shifted with them. Predators lost prey, plants lost grazers, ecosystems collapsed into new forms, and the grasslands themselves changed character, becoming something less wild, less thunderous, less alive with giants. And in this convergence of forces, we glimpse not only their past but also our present. For the giants did not vanish into myth alone. They left echoes, warnings etched into extinction. That human ambition, climatic shifts, and ecological fragility are threads still entangled today, waiting to be tugged again. And as we stand at the edge of our own age of warming and species decline, we must wonder whether we are repeating the same story on a stage far larger. Whether the fate of elephants, rhinos, and bison today mirrors the fall of their ancient cousins, and whether we too will someday look back and ask how we could have let the giants vanish when the clues of their end were already written in the bones of the grasslands. The mystery of what killed the giants of the grasslands lingers like an echo across time, not because we lack answers, but because the answers are layered, tangled, and incomplete, scattered in frozen carcasses, in fossilized bones, and in paintings on cave walls, where ancient humans etched the very animals they may have helped destroy. And as we follow these clues, a haunting truth emerges, that the end of the giants was not the result of one single force, but of many, converging like hunters in the night, climate shifting and shrinking their habitats, vegetation changing in ways their immense appetites could not match, humans spreading with fire and spears, diseases whispering unseen among weakened herds, all weaving together into a tapestry of collapse. And yet even within this tragedy are fragments of wonder. For while mammoths disappeared across most of the earth 10,000 years ago, small herds endured in remote refuges like Wrangel Island until just 4,000 years passed, meaning that when human hands were raising the pyramids, mammoths still roamed snowy shores, their cries lost to the wind, a final reminder of what once was. And the ground sloths too clung to Caribbean islands long after their mainland kin had fallen, as if nature was reluctant to let go of her titans. And yet even these last survivors faded, swallowed by the tide of change, leaving only silence where thunder once rolled, and this silence reshaped the world. For without mammoths to trample forests, without bison in endless herds, without predators with saber-like fangs to keep grazers in check, the grasslands themselves shifted. Forests spread where plains had been, soils changed, rivers altered, and ecosystems bent into new forms, proving that the death of giants is never the death of giants alone, but the unraveling of entire worlds. And this brings us to the uncomfortable mirror of today, for the forces that once killed them still walk beside us. Climate change, overhunting, shrinking habitats, and the spread of new diseases. And though our weapons are no longer stone spears but machines and industries, the result is hauntingly familiar. Elephants, rhinos, and great cats pushed to the edge, just as their ancient cousins were. And the question arises, are we about to repeat history? Are we writing another chapter of silence that future generations will study in bones? Or can we learn from the past and choose a different path? One where the warning of the mammoth is heeded, one where the last thunder is not silenced. For if we do not act, will our descendants one day stand among the empty landscapes and ask of us the same question we ask of the past? What killed the giants of the grasslands, and why did we not stop it when we still had the chance? And if we can recognize that their story is not just about creatures lost, but about the fragile balance of life itself, then perhaps the true conclusion is not despair but responsibility. that the fate of the giants was sealed by forces beyond their control, but ours is not, and that the greatest lesson buried in their bones is not about extinction, but about survival, not theirs, but ours. For the giants remind us that abundance can vanish, that power can fade, and that only wisdom can preserve what is left. So as we walk the grasslands of today, do we choose to listen to their echo, or do we wait until the echo fades into silence forever?